Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another review. Today I'm reviewing the Wes Craven directed horror classic from 1984, A Nightmare on Elm Street. This is my DVD that's a part of the DVD set that they did over 10 years ago, or at least the printing I have is from 10 years ago, and I've had it about 10 years now actually. The film has a 7.5 on IMDb, and 83% with the critics on Rotten Tomatoes, and a 94. This is the consensus as written. Craven's intelligent premise, combined with the horrifying visual appearance of Freddy Krueger, still causes nightmares to this day. I will agree with that. And then there's something on here on Wikipedia that's written under it on the article that I thought was interesting, and I will happen to agree with this. Critics and film historians argue that the film's premise is the struggle to define the distinction between dreams and reality manifested by the lives and dreams of the teens in the film, and they also praise the film's ability to transgress, and this is in the quotation marks, this part, the boundaries between the imaginary and real, toying with our audience perceptions. And I will agree with that. That is especially true during the third act, which I will get to after a bit. In addition to being directed by Wes Craven, it's also written by him, and if I remember right, he wrote this film around 1980, and it took him a couple of years to get the film made, because at first nobody wanted to make it. It's like, it's a dream, no one will be afraid of it. Boy, whoever said that is probably going, damn it. The film stars John Saxon, Heather Langenkamp, Ronnie Blakely, Amanda Wyss, Nick Corey, Johnny Depp in his first role, and Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. The score is done by Charles Bernstein, which it really does add to the tone and sense of the film, especially the main theme, because as he put it on the Never Sleep Again documentary, the way that the theme's musical arrangement changes, it kind of messes with your perception of normality. That's not the way he put it, but that's the gist of what he said. The film was made for a little less than 2 million, 1.8 million according to Wikipedia. I'm going to double check that on IMDb because that's usually a little bit more accurate when they have it listed. I don't see. Oh, here it is. Yeah, 1.8. Made a little less than that in opening weekend. Its total run, slightly different numbers. Wikipedia has 25.5 million as the number. IMDb has 26.5. So about that. It was a pretty good gross for how much the film cost. So you can't really say that it underperformed with a gross like that, especially how New Line Cinema was at the time. I mean, they weren't the conglomerate that they are now. They were just like a little independent film studio. Part of Wes Craven's inspiration for this film were a series of articles he saw in the paper, specifically the New York Times. And as he put it on the documentary that came with this film, the paper never seemed to put these stories together, like connect them, like whoever was writing them didn't connect it. I'm going to guess it was also different authors at different points in time, and I guess they never even talked to each other, or they never thought it was interesting enough to make a connection, or their people higher up told them not to mention it. But no one in the paper seemed to make a connection. But Craven, reading it, and he's like, wait a minute, there was a story like this before, and he went through it, and it struck a chord with him because the stories were about these men of Southeast Asian descent. I think they were, I forget what they were. I think they were from Laos. Their families were from Laos or something. They were from immigrant families, and they all died in the middle of nightmares. And one of them specifically, this is the one where when you hear the story about it, you're like, oh, okay, there's a lot of this story in the final film. That is, this guy did not want to go back to sleep. He was taking pills to stay awake. His family eventually found that he was keeping a coffee pot in his closet. He was doing whatever he had to not go to sleep, because whatever it was, he just did not want to go to sleep. He eventually fell asleep one night. His father takes him upstairs. Eventually, him and his wife hear commotion coming from their son's room. They go, and they found that he had died in apparently the middle of a nightmare. And of course, this happened a couple other times, and it stuck with Wes. And when he started writing this film, he incorporated some of the elements into it. Other elements, of course, are in the thing with Freddy Krueger, the name came from someone that apparently bullied Craven when he was young, but the general idea for how the character is comes from a story when he was also very young. I think younger than when the kid bullied him. This one night, Craven, saw an elderly man walking down below his window. I guess he's told it different ways each time I've heard it. It's hard to tell if it was like an alleyway that the kid was that his window looked down on, or if it was like in an apartment you see a sidewalk or something like that. But anyway, the guy was walking down there, and he suddenly gets the sensation that he's being watched. He looks up, he sees Wes. Well, Wes pulls back, and the guy's watching him. He's back for like a minute or so, comes back. The guy's still looking at him, and then like does something like to scare the crap out of him, and he runs away. And then tells us one way I heard it, he got his brother. His brother went down with a bat to see if the guy was still there, and he wasn't. And the one he told on Never Sleep Again, if I remember correctly, he just was scared, and the guy walked off. And Wes would imagine that this guy's kind of like how Freddy would be. This is something Freddy would do in his time off. And another thing is, originally a character of Freddy was intended to be a child molester, in addition to being a child murderer, but they cut that out because in California there were a lot of highly publicized child molestation cases, and they didn't want, the accusation of, "You're banking off of this, you terrible people." So they cut that out. And as Robert Englund states in one of the documentaries, instead of it being a major thing, it just becomes subtext. And it's been a couple years since I watched this film, and with that in the back of my head, you could definitely tell a lot through it, especially with Englund's performance as Freddy. You could tell that subtext is there, just the way that Freddy acts and all that. It just makes his performance a lot creepier when you realize that. The plot of the film is it takes place in a small town. The original film doesn't really give a town name. You can tell from the background it might be somewhere in California, but they don't give a name because, make it a little bit more timeless, and like you could be your neighborhood. But the later sequels retconned it to be Springwood, Ohio. And our main characters, we have Nancy, Heather Langenkamp, Glenn, Johnny Depp, Tina, Amanda Wyss, and Rod, Nick Corey. The first person we see in the film out of them is Tina, and it's her nightmare. She wakes up, scared to death. Next day at school, she's talking to her friends about it. Nancy's like, "Everyone has a bad dream once in a while." Then, of course, she gets into a small argument with her boyfriend. And, they spend the night at her house that night. And it looks like things are going to go well, but then Tina gets killed in the middle of a nightmare. And this is where we first see Freddy being really creepy. Of course, they think the boyfriend did it. It's the usual thing, because they were sharing a bed. He had to have done it. And of course, he gets arrested eventually. But then Nancy starts to be stalked by Freddy in her dreams. And from there, it just goes on. Freddy keeps trying to kill her multiple times. Nancy doesn't want to go to sleep. Whenever she talks to the adults around her, they think, it's just usual teen stuff, or yeah, she doesn't know what she's talking about. But even with this, you can tell there's a subtle weird thing with the parents, just more so with the older adults, like her father, Lieutenant Thompson, and of course her mother. There's like a weird thing going on, and you're wondering like what's going on here. And of course, eventually Nancy confronts her mother when she pulls something out of her dream, and we find out that Freddy was a child murderer who killed at least around 20 kids in the neighborhood. And when the law was unable to do anything, she mentioned something about the judge having the warrant signed in the wrong place, but I'm guessing it'd be more. Then maybe this is just me talking from having studied criminal law, at least in California. I'd say more than likely Freddy probably would have been let go because someone forgot to follow proper procedure. So the evidence was whatever evidence they had was deemed inadmissible, so he'd have to be let go, which of course would be more of a justification reason for the mob that follows Freddy and then burns him alive, which is what happened, which is, the secret that, looks like they're all sharing. Which the thing about this is it makes you wonder how, at least in the original film, and some of the sequels answer it a little bit, how far did this whole thing about what they did to Freddy go? Third film makes it clear that the lieutenant was at least culpable in covering it up, or at least making sure that nobody knew specifically who did it other than the people, that, you were there, you were there, you were there. This film, we just at least seem to know the lieutenant knows something happened to him, or at least knew about Freddy, but not what, not what his wife did, but there's a little implication of that. And of course, this whole knowledge adds a little thing to the mother character because she's drinking, so it makes you wonder, is she drinking because of this secret and she feels a little twinge of guilt, even though I'm not advocating mob justice, you can argue that Freddy did deserve it, especially with that little subtext that I mentioned earlier. And then of course in the deleted scene we find out, of course, there's a personal thing about Freddy having killed her first kid, which I really wish they had kept that in the film. That would have added a little bit more to that scene. Why they cut it, I don't know, but it's an interesting thing to keep in mind when you're talking about her character, as well as her relationship with Lieutenant Thompson. I don't even think they mentioned in the film if Lieutenant and Marge are divorced or just separated because of something. But either way, it works together. And the thing with the character of Tina, it's kind of the psycho thing with her character is that the false heroine, the red herring heroine, where you think she's going to be the main character and turns out she's not. Though it's a little different because with that, we don't really get our main character in Psycho until a little bit after that because it follows Norman for a while, whereas in this one, we definitely already have our main character after that. It's just we think it's going to be Tina and then it turns out to be Nancy. And the whole thing with Nancy is she's a very strong heroine. With some of these early slashers, that's probably the one weak thing you could say about them. I mean, Halloween, Jamie Lee Curtis does a great job in her performance, but she's not really a super strong heroine. I mean, there's times where she fights back, like when she hits Michael in the throat with the sewing needle and then the time she stabs him, but then she's not really being uber strong. It's more Donald Pleasance being the strong hero character. She doesn't really become a strong hero figure until H2O, which is why her getting the axe and yelling Michael is her character's get away from her, you bitch moment. Whereas Nancy, I mean, she's struggling at first, but then of course, when at the end she's like, screw this, I'm taking power back, which of course kind of ties in a little bit with that subtext thing in a slightly different way, especially when you tie it in with the Freddy Nancy relationship and the three going through the 3 films that the 2 characters are in together. Makes their relationship a lot more interesting. I'll talk about that more when I review New Nightmare. But I can't really think of any other slasher film around this time where they had a strong lead one, especially a lot of the early Friday the 13th ones. They didn't really have an uber strong female lead character that you could compare to like Nancy. I don't think they really had one. As I said earlier, Robert Englund is just super creepy as Freddy. It's one of those things where it's just the right actor playing the right character that just clicks, and it makes it hard to imagine someone else playing that role. Though initially one of the other guys I considered for the role, I could have seen him doing Freddy equally good, but the character would have turned out just a little bit different. That was David Warner, if I remember it's right. He had just played a killer in Time After Time. And of course, later, a small role in one of the Star Trek movies, and then of course, the one Doctor character in TMNT 2, among other stuff that he's done. I could see him doing it. It's just, the series would have turned out different. And of course, at other times they were going to do stuntman, and they even did replace Robert Englund briefly in the second film with a stuntman, but it just didn't work. Because it's not like Michael Myers or Jason, where the character is silent, where you can get a guy that's mostly known for stuntman to do the role, and then just give him direction on what you want to do. This character, he talks, even though in this film he's not really much of a wisecracker, and a lot of times there's scenes where his performance is physical. It's just combined with the dialogue scenes and also the mindset of an actor and some of the physical things and also some of the little creepy little mannerisms that Freddy does. You can see why an actor is needed in the role, and Robert just blew it out of the park. I'd say, looking back on it, this is definitely one of my favorite performances of his throughout the context of the series. Have to watch all of them again to say if it's my favorite one, but as far as the creepiness goes, especially with that subtext I mentioned earlier, this is definitely, number 1. And an interesting thing, and you can definitely tell this a little bit, is according to Robert Englund, he based the physicality of Freddy with the glove on Klaus Kinski's performance in Werner Herzog's Nosferatu remake from '79. And of course, according to the DVD commentary, in his mind, the backstory of Freddy was based on something from his own childhood where he was the only student that received no Valentine's Day cards on Valentine's Day. Which, of course, even with the backstory they did later, you can sort of see that. I mean, who's going to give a Valentine's card to the bastard son of 100 maniacs? Now, as I said before, this is Johnny Depp's first film, and you can kind of tell that in his performance a little bit. More so when you compare it to his later performances. You can tell he wasn't as experienced, but for how the character Glenn is, he does a good job. I mean, there's some moments where you could see the innate talent that Depp has, And you could tell, watching his later films, he developed it more as he did more films. It's like anything, you got to do it more in order to get good at it. But you could see it there, and watching again, it's like, yeah, you could definitely tell this guy was going to be talented. He just needed to work on it more. And the funny thing is, the main reason he was even hired in the first place is because Wes Craven's daughter thought he looked pretty good, and she talked it over with her, and like, all right. And the funny thing is, he didn't even go there originally to audition. He went with his friend Jackie Earle Haley to audition, and someone asked him to read, which is kind of one of those little funny things involved in this series, that Jackie Earle Haley would later be the remake's Freddy Krueger. Nice little weird connection there. The iconic Krueger makeup was developed by David Miller, who based the creation on photographs of burn victims he obtained from the UCLA Medical Center. And it still, to this day, looks very good. Though if there's one thing I have always noticed, is that in a couple scenes the makeup looks slightly different than it does in other ones. Like in the scene where he's going down, where Freddy's down the alley, and even in the scene in the boiler room during Nancy's first nightmare when she's in school. It looks like there's parts of the flesh peeling off. Maybe the makeup was different for a little bit for that. And then other scenes it looks more traditional, at least compared to how it looks in other films in the series. It's just one little thing I've noticed. I don't know if they were going for a slightly different look with those scenes, or if those scenes were filmed earlier and he hadn't gotten the process down yet, or if it was later in the day and the makeup was starting to peel off a little bit and they put it in because it gave an interesting look. And another great thing about this film is, despite its relatively low budget, a lot of the nightmare stuff is executed very well, and all the effects and stuff look pretty good for its budget. Like how they executed the Tina's death still looks excellent. Did the room on the gimbal, and of course, if you understand how film stuff is done, you can sort of guess, like, yeah, I bet they did that scene with her on the floor and him upside down or something like that. And funny enough, that's actually how they did part of that scene. And then the room being on a gimbal, which they reused later for the infamous bed death scene, which this I didn't know, but I'm not actually that surprised, is that apparently there was an electrocution thing during the filming of that scene, and I guess someone got a minor shock, but it just really ruined a lot of the electrical equipment. But you watch the scene, you're like, yeah, I bet that ruined some electrical equipment. And the interesting thing is that the tone of a lot of the nightmare scenes is different from the real world thing, which which for the first couple parts of the film sets it off a little bit. But it also makes the third act a little confusing, especially when we find out that Nancy was still in a dream, even though it looked like she wasn't. Which, this makes me wonder, is that last part before, the studio mandated add-on, was Nancy still dreaming there? It makes you wonder, which is why I think that ending would have been stronger if they just left it there and then, showed the girls and that's it. But no, Robert Shea had to argue at Wes Craven, and we get the studio mandated thing of the convertible lid coming down, Freddy in control, and then Freddy reaching through and dragging the mother in like something out of a Bugs Bunny cartoon. That's all, folks. Just imagine how much stronger that ending would have been if it makes you wondering if she was still dreaming or not. After she took away Freddy's power, at least, because that's a good way to actually have to defeat a villain when it involves dreams, which I guess that's a little bit of the the Asian influence on Wes Craven's writing, because it's brought up one scene with Johnny Depp and Nancy, and I think the culture he mentions is from Asia. I'm not entirely sure, so if I'm wrong on that, please correct me, because I don't remember the name of the culture he mentioned. He just mentioned something about the culture that they get everything from dreams or something. But, it's an interesting way. They only bring it up one more time, if I remember right. They were going to bring it up in Freddy vs. Jason, but they decided to do that scene a different way. But anyway, like I said, still a slasher film that holds up. Great kills, you got characters you care about, a villain you just love to hate, excellent direction by the director, good score, special effects look very good, especially for the budget.